So this had like a really clickbaity title and a really clickbaity thumbnail. The early reviews say it all, and this is insane. So I'm guessing there's some early reviews out in the wild for D4, and I'm excited to see what they have to say. What kind of information's out there, some stuff that we can look at and dig into with you guys. All right, so the positives, we're all probably aware of the positives. The negatives are what I want to get into, because I think a lot of people are hyper inflating negatives, or making negatives sound worse than they are, and I'm really curious to see how bad these negatives actually are.
So first of all, a big warning. Yes, we cannot forget about this history here with Activision and Blizzard.
I mean, Activision's terrible anyway, right? Like everybody that's a gamer knows Activision's predatory sort of tendencies and the way they like to. I mean, they're a corporation. They have stockholders that they're responsible for, and they have margins. And they put things out there, but people buy them. So, I mean, you can be pissed off at Activision, but at the end of the day, like, people are still buying the product. It's a consumer issue and not really the problem of a company for putting it out there. Like, the company puts it out there. You don't have to buy it. Just saying.
About Diablo Immortal. We have to talk about it before I start this video.
Okay, so more than likely, I'm actually going to cut all this shit about Diablo Immortal out, because I don't find that it's actually relevant. It's a fear that a lot of people have. But as it stands right now, there's no proof that Diablo Immortal has any sort of sway or function in Diablo 4, as they're two separate games. So we'll listen to what they say, but more than likely, this whole rant will be cut out. Also, I want to point out, I don't know how much you guys like watch and read news, but there's been a lot of news stories come out here recently about how live service games are not financial wins for most companies. Having a live service game typically costs a company more money than what it brings in. So the only real reason to keep a live service alive is to keep hype generated for your next IP and to keep the money flowing, so you have big spike up in sales and revenue, and then that slowly gets eaten into during the live service, which then takes you into the next game, IP, or iteration, or DLC, or something like that.
Okay, we're going to talk about the good stuff right now. The good news is this game is so much more like Diablo 2 instead of 3, and I think a lot of us will celebrate this in terms of art style and story, and even gameplay is more Diablo 2 than 3. I'll explain that in just a moment. Now, reports say the game is running near flawlessly, even in the beta stage, even
That's
at higher
good.
resolutions at 4K, with very little bugs and crashes even in the beta. The combat is also feeling great, and so far a bit different from Diablo 3 in that mobs appear to be a bit smaller in the earlier stages of the game, with higher health bars, meaning you'll have to be far more tactical with your approach to combat compared to Diablo 3. Now, that just means
That's good, though.
you're going to need to use your full arsenal of skills here.
It just means you're not going to button spam like your basic skill or whatever.
And
That's not
skills,
necessarily
there are
bad.
a ton of them spread throughout 5 incredibly unique classes, which include Barbarian, Sorceress, Rogue, Necromancer, and Druid. Now, each skill has something to offer and makes your character completely stand out, even at lower levels. There's a ton of choice here. In fact, so much so that it might be a little bit overwhelming to some of you, but this is one of the most replayable RPG experiences out there.
Also, another thing that wasn't mentioned is you cannot fully unlock a single character's skill tree. No matter what you do in the game's current state, you cannot unlock everything on your skill tree, which means you either have to pay to respec, which the devs have already said will become prohibitively more expensive to the point that it's not worth doing, and it's worth starting a second character. So you might have to treat it like it's an older Diablo game, where if you want to try a couple different builds, you might just have to power level a couple alts.
And I think that's the point. Each skill also has 5 additional passives that can be attached to it, and so on. And then you have to consider your ultimates that you can get for your character.
God, look at that world boss. Looks good, though, doesn't it? Like, look how far out the camera zoomed. The camera zoomed out pretty far to get that in frame.
You have the option of respecking your character, and if you don't like the look of your new loot you just picked up, there's a transmog system.
I don't think it's that bad as long as there's still a shared stash. Yeah, I don't think it'll be bad as long as there's a shared stash. Especially because, like, you can, especially if they do, like, the wardrobe or the armory where you can save different sets. So then you can just come in and be like, oh, okay, I transferred all my gear back in the stash. Get on your character, you go to the armory, hit the button, bam, all your gear's on. You don't even have to worry about it.
System here as well, so it's very user-friendly for sure. Plus, the combat. Let's talk about that. The combat itself is feeling a bit more like Diablo 2 and 3, in that characters have more weight to them. In other words, they don't just snap to a target, they seem to have more physics. And characters seem to take a bit more deliberate time to aim, which means, again, planning in combat is more important this time around, and using all of your abilities is going to be absolutely critical.
I'm curious to get in and play with the combat. Like, I've heard a lot of really good things about the combat, but hopefully they took it in a correct way, but they didn't slow it down to where it just feels sluggish. Because there's a difference between like something feeling good and deliberate and something feeling like absolutely sluggish and non-responsive. They sped up D3 so much. Yeah, I agree.
All right, so we got to talk.
And that's where I mean, like, I don't mind if it feels a little bit slow or whatever, just as long as the characters are responsive.
About one of the biggest changes to this franchise, and that is the introduction of a true, seamless, interconnected open world. Now, Diablo 4's open world is...
Look at that fucking snake.
Monstrous in size.
Looks
and the
good.
open world is also considered what is static, which is good news, because it appears there's more handcrafted elements here. Now, world bosses change up the open world rhythm and will dynamically spawn in and are
Look at those world bosses, man. They look so good.
considered big battle moments.
That rock is going to wreck so many people. Get to the inside,
Where
boys.
you'll want to work together
Inside,
with other players
inside.
to take down such huge bosses.
I
but
can't wait. I cannot wait to start doing world bosses with you
This
guys.
is also a little bit worrying. Let me explain. So,
Look at the fucking blood flow.
isn't Diablo supposed to be a somewhat lonely, intimate experience? These multiplayer zones and big boss encounters put you in multiplayer instances with other players roaming around. It kind of sounds like Diablo Immortal, and there's a worry that this will take away from the experience that is...
So to address this point, the devs, at least in a previous video I've done, or in some previous information I've seen, the devs have already discussed this in length, saying that they don't plan on a lot of the open world areas. They want them to still feel desolate. The only place you should maybe run into other people is if you're in town, and they're going to limit the amount of people that are available in an instance to where it'll still feel very isolated. It just won't feel like you're the only survivor anymore, but it will feel still small and intimate. And it sounds like in the world boss zones might be the only place where you have a chance to really run into like a full giant team. So I get the fear here, but I'm pretty sure this has already been addressed, saying that the game will still feel desolate and in a way that you're not just going to run into tons of people. I imagine it's going to be closer to a Destiny 2 style experience, where like most of the time when you're out on patrols, you might run into somebody, you might not, but it's not going to be like disruptive.
Supposed to be Diablo. The biggest fear is over-leveled players making this game far too easy, or defeating mobs of enemies before you can even get to them. This was happening in Diablo Immortal, and a lot of players are worried that it's going to plague Diablo 4. Now, Blizzard has made their own comments about this, but I say we wait and see what happens. Now,
I feel like it's not fair. Like, if a company has already put out a presser and said that's not what we're going for, right? Then that is their development team has said that's not what they're going for. So when the game launches, that is what happens, they'll just throttle the amount of people that are allowed per server. In the initial like onset of any game, it's going to be flooded with so many people, and there's only so many servers that the team at Blizzard's going to have. They're not going to buy 100 million servers knowing that within 60 days, 80% of the player base is going to drop off. So in the beginning, it might feel a little bit more crowded, but you got to give it time to normalize. Yeah, the guy's giving a very negative review, and it's his right, but I'm trying to look at it objectively, and I feel like you have to, if Diablo has addressed it, or if Blizzard has addressed it, then you have to adopt a wait and see attitude.
open world itself, we have 5 biomes. The starter zone alone is absolutely huge in the beta.
You don't want to play with other people. That's why. No, I get it. I'm curious. I'm more of the wait and see kind of guy.
We've got 7 waypoints to find, 3 strongholds to liberate, 24 side quests to experience during our beta time, 83 different locations to discover, 23 dungeons to explore, 28 altars of Lilith, which give you permanent stat increases. So that's a lot. And there's going to be even more, of course, with the final game. According to sources, 100 50 dungeons are planned for launch, giving you an idea of how much bigger this game is going to be overall compared to the small slice we're getting with the beta. So yeah, it's going to be a monster of a game.
I can't wait.
And if you played Diablo 3, which I think that you probably have, then you know about World Tiers, which is going to be your difficulty, and it has returned. And if you increase that difficulty, it's going to increase your rewards, which is gold and better loot. So yeah, it's going to be fun to mess around with those World Tiers.
I think in the beginning, like getting some friends together and just cranking to the highest tier you can will be fun.
Now,
just to have that difficulty back, you know what I mean?
we got to talk about dungeons. Now, these are going to be procedurally generated dungeons, each one of them having a theme or tone. There's the asylum-looking dungeon, haunted woods, and so on. And it seems like there's enough variety here despite it being procedurally generated. Now, you're going to feel right at home with these dungeons apparently, but it's the bosses that make them unique this time. Every dungeon does end with a big boss encounter.
Right.
And these encounters are being described as incredibly well-designed bosses. And the question...
And there's what, like, what they say, 150 dungeons, so there's 150, like, hand-designed bosses?
is going to be this. How many of these bosses will be reused? Will the game begin to feel redundant as time goes on? Again, we can only find that out with the full version of the game.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fair question. Like, are they going to be reskins, or are they going to be 150 unique? I mean, that's going to be a question.
Game right now.
I don't know that you'll have the answer. I mean, I imagine there's probably going to be a fair amount of reskins, but I also imagine that some of the dungeons, well, no, with Diablo's tier system, right? Like, if you crank it up to T16, all content's relevant, so...
Now, it is a bit of a concern.
Maybe they won't reskin? I mean, if they only have to develop 150 mobs, like, that can't be too bad.
Now, the good news is that some of these dungeons are absolutely massive, and you might be roaming into them without activating a quest line or a side activity. Get this. Some of these dungeons take a half hour to clear out, and the ensuing battles are intense and apparently glorious.
Sounds like Elden Ring. Does it sound like Elden Ring to you guys? It sounds like Elden Ring to me. Like, you'll just happen to be in a dungeon and not even notice.
Now, the biggest fear, again, is this going to feel like another Ubisoft game with tons of checklists to do? Well, apparently no. The story and characters are what is going to be propelling you forward with this game. And it's the sheer variety in basically every aspect that is very, very attractive. And I guess there's always something to do that is interesting, but most notable...
Well, the concept, too, would be, right, like, if there's that much stuff to do, but you only need to do a fraction of it to get your character to max level, and then if you continue to play afterwards to do the content, I would say your average gamer will probably clear most of the content or try to checklist it all and then stop. So I think it's a fair amount of content.
Well, it seems to be tied to narrative, which is really, really good so far. But yeah, there's also these dynamic events in the open world, which now act more like big side activities instead of just random encounters. You'll run into forts overrun by enemies and haunted ghosts, but you'll also run into strongholds. Now, these are big towns or areas taken over by creatures, undead, or what have you, and it's going to be culminating in a very big boss battle. Now, if you defeat this stronghold, you'll get access to a new dungeon and more side activities, and it just opens up more to the open world. So
it sounds fun.
But yeah, you're definitely going to want to take on a stronghold whenever you see it, but it might require you to level up before you can really get in there. From what I've heard,
I'm sure
they are challenging, which is just the way we want it. And now we got to talk about character creation, which is apparently underwhelming. You heard right. So, character creation is going to be brand new to the core Diablo experience.
It's all looking good to you. It's looking good to me. I mean, what's the character customization look like in Diablo 3? There isn't any. Exactly. So if it's better than Diablo 3's, then it's a fucking improvement. I agree, Johnny. Like, there's some people that get like so salty about not having enough character customization, and I'm like, bruh, your character's gonna be under fucking armor the entire time. You're never gonna see your fucking character. Why does it matter?
I'm talking about the proper sequels here. It's in Diablo Immortal, but the character creator isn't that impressive according to some people that have played the game so far. In fact, SkillUp gave a rating of 3 out of 10 for the actual character creator.
Well, I'm not playing fucking Character Creator Simulator. I want to play Diablo. Do you know what I mean?
He's saying that it's basically more about tweaking a preset more than anything else. But again, this is a beta. We'll see how it evolves over time.
I personally don't care about the character creation that much.
With all the armor you're going to be throwing on your character anyway, I don't see it as too big of a deal. However, what is cool is you will see your created character in the full-blown.
Plus, it allows them to keep the characters within a specific design that they have in mind. Fine-tuning your character? Oh, come on, Meruko. Oh no, pick a preset, whatever will people do. Yeah, I mean, like, so you're playing a fantasy game, right? Not this game, but this is just a general rant. Like, say you play a fantasy game and you pick a dwarf. Well, do you need to be able to customize it to be 6'1" with dark hair and hazel eyes, of a muscular stature because that's what you personally fucking look like? No! It's a fucking dwarf. Like, let them just keep it as close to their art style as they want. They want a cyberpunk adjustment. They got to adjust them genitals. Somebody has to. No, fuck it. Character customization's fine the way it is.
Cinematics, which is brand new to Diablo.
God, that face looks good though.
So I think that's going to be really neat.
It's just one of those things that like really just chaps my ass sometimes.
Now we got to talk about the main quest line without any spoilers, and apparently it is absolutely amazing. It does a great job of giving players options. So it is a non-linear quest line. It'll branch off into several different paths, ultimately culminating into a single direction, but will always provide the player.
I'm always
with
doing good,
options.
Kilky. I'm always doing good.
Yeah, we got to talk about some of the side.
How's your day been? Do anything good today?
Side quests, which are also known as chain quests, where you'll be doing smaller tasks before ultimately doing the primary goal of that quest. And to draw a comparison, think Ghost of Tsushima quest design in your Diablo 4, which is, I think, a perfect way of summing it up, and I love this. So we got to talk about the end game here. The end game is going to be where Diablo 4 lives or dies. It's going to be about leveling up and getting access to higher and higher world tiers.
I agree with this.
In turn, gives you more valuable loot and gear, but you're going to be running into some major...
It's got to be all about the loot grind. You can stay away from work. I gotcha. I feel you on that for sure.
Challenges along the way, like the level 100 boss who essentially gatekeeps your entry into very high world tier levels. He's the one stopping you from getting access to amazing loot, and trust me, he's not going to be a pushover at all. Now, Helltide events are also unique to the endgame, and accessible to players who only reach World Tier 3 Nightmare.
Diablo is always a loot grind, but it's fun times. I agree. I mean, that's what Diablo is, right? Is like grinding loot to get to a higher world tier, to grind loot, to do harder content, to grind more loot, to place on a leaderboard if that's your thing. And if not, it's just to grind loot to show off to your friends. I mean, that's what gaming is. Gaming is ultimately playing a game to disengage with things and then showing off your accomplishments to people.
Also, modify existing dungeons with the Nightmare Sigils, upping the challenge quite a bit, but this also gives way to better rewards. Get this, players note that it isn't a simple difficulty increase mechanism. The pace feels slower here, and players must fulfill different objectives depending on the sigil, so there are some gameplay changes as well. Now, world bosses and PvP are both going to be a very big part of the Diablo or in-game experience as well. The Fields of Hatred will be the PvP zone for...
Get your preferred gear set and hit them prestige levels and rifts. At least that was Diablo 3's life. I mean, pretty much. It's just grinding it at that point.
Diablo 4 players can fight each other and enemies to gather what's called Seeds of Hatred. You could bring these seeds to an altar of extraction where you're going to be converting them into red dust. You can then purchase PvP cosmetics, mounts, and other things through the red dust you collected.
Could be fun.
And then there's this, the Paragon board. This builds on Diablo 3's Paragon system.
We've talked about the Paragon board before.
Where you start earning Paragon points at max level, and then you spend these points to get a fixed bonus to...
Yeah, maybe I thought you started getting Paragon points at level 50, but I'm probably wrong. I don't know why 50's in my head.
Certain abilities, giving...
Also, if you look up here in the upper right-hand corner, it tells you, I think that's probably, is that the character?
A new way to keep progressing even after max level.
Yeah.
But Diablo 4 adds a new layer of content.
We did earlier, Eric. I'll have a video up probably tomorrow, going over some of the class stuff and some of my thoughts on them.
Complexity to this system, giving players tough choices to make as boards lead into other boards and can be rotated and so on. Let's just say there's a lot going on here that you'll be able to sink your teeth into after.
I'm excited to play with the Paragon board. The Paragon board and the rune system and how the runes interact with your Paragon board, I think is really going to start adding like a lot of depth into the game. And if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, I'll try to put the video in this video. I'll try to embed it so you guys can find that, where they kind of talk about the Paragon system and stuff like that.
Diablo 4 will also have both a season pass and in-game shop where you can spend premium currency or actual money to obtain cosmetic only gear that have no stat increases. Now, Blizzard is very, very vocal about this being cosmetic only, so there's no pay to win here. So I'm really, really hoping that they have learned their lesson from Diablo Immortal.
See, this is another one of those moments where we talked about earlier. If Diablo is vocal that there's no pay to win aspect, then that's where then I mean, you just have to take them at their word at that point. Just saying that you hope that they've learned their lesson is just in my view, is a negative way to look at it. If Diablo said they've learned their lesson and they don't want to have another Diablo Immortal on their hands, then obviously we shouldn't.
And of course, the launch of Diablo 3. As for the Season Pass, the free tier of the Season Pass will offer gameplay boosts, but these are defined as things which make the journey of leveling up a fresh seasonal character more streamlined. For example, a boost that accelerates the rate at which XP is earned, but there's no way to pay for these boosts. They are all free.
Okay.
All Season Pass rewards, free or paid, will be cosmetic only beyond that.
Okay, so it sounds like the regular Season Pass that you'll get leveling up will have like your XP boosts and maybe like loot increases and stuff like that, and then the premium Season Pass will be like down below it, or like a Fortnite style where it's like certain tiers you get certain cosmetics and stuff like that, and weapon skins, I'm assuming.
You know, the Diablo community though, they're going to be digging deep into this system, you better believe it. For any exploits and flaws, let's see what they can find. And of course, what you are seeing here, at least in my opinion, is visually stunning, and there's a reason for this. Of course, it's a huge upgrade from Diablo 3.
I think the game looks great.
The graphics are less, I guess you would say, cartoony.
They are. The game's graphics are way less cartoony. It's definitely a more rugged, older school, like older art style, dark, dreary sort of art style.
There's some controversies about Diablo 3 being too colorful. Well, everything is now far more realistic, looking in terms of color and presentation.
I like splashes of color. I think if it's done tastefully, it's not too bad, but I can see the gripe with Diablo 3 being a little too bright and cartoony. Like, I get it.
A lot of Diablo fans will love that they took more inspiration from Diablo 2 than, say, you know, World of Warcraft. But yeah, let's ultimately end this with the biggest fears and worries for Diablo 4.
Okay, so we're going to listen to these fears and worries, because all the fears that have been brought up to this point have been addressed by the team or have been speculative fears. And not anything that's actually in the game, and we're worried about how it's going to interact, so I'm curious.
So yeah, in Diablo 4, you'll be able to trade any gear piece under Legendary. You won't be able to trade Legendary or unique items. You will be able to trade certain currencies, but we're not too sure exactly how this one works yet. Now, the good news is you'll be able to trade rare items and take powers off Legendary items, though. I do think that this will make seeking out Legendaries a very intimate experience, but some people might hate the fact that there isn't like an open free trade system for absolutely everything. And some people want a system like the last Epoch, where you're given one of two options: joining the Merchants Guild, where you can trade for profit and grow, or you could join the Circle of Fortune, where trade isn't an option, but it improves the quantity and quality of item drops. There's also specific.
I mean, that's an interesting system, but
quests which lead.
I mean, it's an interesting system, right? Like, you trade, but you get less drops, or you sign up to be a non-trading character, and you get what would be considered more drops, or what I would assume is standard drops and nerf drops, depending on which one you're in. You think legendary items should be rare? I think they should. I think a lot of games have really made legendaries not feel that rare. I would prefer if when I got something crazy that altered my build or my playstyle, I got that dopamine hit and I looked at it and I was like, can I use this? How can I build around this? Is this worth adding to my build? Instead of having just a vault full of, or a stash full of legendaries and just getting them by the dozens and breaking them down and using their dust as currency.
Leads to super rare items. So some players believe you should at least have an option for open trading in Diablo 4, or kind of opt out of that experience for some better loot.
I mean, you could, It just depends.
Also, another
Like my view on that is like, would it be cool? Yeah, maybe, but it's not there, so it's an irrelevant conversation. Do you know what I mean?
worry is the crafting system. It seems to be pretty underwhelming according to first reports. Now, Diablo recently revealed this system, and from players' initial reactions, the crafting system has a lot to be desired, but we'll see what a broader audience has to say about it.
It's probably a bare bones crafting system. We need to get our hands on it and see. Would I like a robust crafting system? Absolutely. But any crafting system that functions and serves a purpose and isn't just an afterthought, I'm happy with. It's better than nothing.
It during the beta. And most notably, I am very, very, very worried about Diablo Immortal. My biggest fear is...
All right, so this is like the 12th time Diablo Immortals came up in a video that is not titled Diablo Immortal.
With Diablo 4 is that Blizzard wants to play it safe, don't show too much of their hand at the beginning of this game's life, and then slowly introduce predatory monetization schemes that they've learned from Diablo Immortal into Diablo 4. I will say this, it is great to hear that they plan on supporting the game for...
I'm going to name this video Diablo Immortal Ruins Diablo 4 because that's all this video has been about, is about how Diablo Immortal has ruined Diablo 4, yet none of the predatory items that have been in Diablo Immortal are introduced in Diablo 4, nor have the devs said they're going to be introduced. You can tell this creator has a bad taste in their mouth, and every one of their opinions is already jaded.
In years after its release, I'm
like everything. You know what I mean?
Also, I'm absolutely terrified at the same time. There are very, very few games anymore that can properly pull off a live service approach without being overly aggressive.
There's a reason, and we just talked about this 5 minutes ago. There's a reason games don't pull off the live service approach, because it costs them too much money. So they're trying to find a way to fund it. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's why they do it.
With the monetization schemes, or they have a problem with releasing actual meaningful content. So only
games don't release meaningful content anymore. It's just not the way it works.
Time will tell with what happens here with Diablo 4. But yeah, you guys know the history of Blizzard right now with Diablo. They have a lot to prove to the community. But yeah, I'm excited to get my hands on this game.
All right, guys, so the early reviews were in. The early reviews had nothing but real positives to say about the game. They had a few negatives about the crafting system, character customization. But overall, it sounds like early reviews for the game are in, and that Diablo 4 is looking like a good game. A lot of the criticisms that were levied against the game were all conjecture, which isn't always the best approach. I can understand that there is a level of trepidation, but it's definitely better to approach it as a wait and see instead of like jading opinions going into something. It's better to go into something neutral than go into it with an already negative taste in your mouth, because then things that maybe aren't that bad are going to taste overly bitter. So that's my opinion. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you've got any comments, or you disagree or agree with my opinions, definitely leave them down in the comments. And until next time, have a great morning, noon, or night, wherever you are.